Well, as David said, my name is Morgan. So glad that you're here joining us in the final part of the series called Timeless. And if you're here today for the first time, you're kind of joining us at the end of the movie, but I'll give you a little bit of a recap in just a moment. But the reason we're calling this series Timeless is because we all share something in common. We live in a world that is fascinated by and at some levels obsessed with trends. There are all kinds of trends. We want to know who's trendy, who is trendy, what is trendy. And there are fashion trends, food trends, hairstyle trends, technology trends, economic trends. There are all kinds of things. And we've said this, that in a trendy world, the best things in life are in fact timeless. That the best things in this life are timeless. That there are some things in this world that will always look good on you. There are some things that is in my best interest and then is your best interest to kind of surround our lives around these things that are timeless, because they will eventually be good for us in the long run as well. And one of the amazing things about this is because if I took a photo of you today and you look great, but if I was to send you that photo in 10 years' time, you'd be like, why was I wearing my hair like that? Or maybe I still had hair back then. Or maybe, hey, I can't believe that I was wearing those clothes. What was I thinking in those moments? There's nothing bad about trends. We're not trying to demonize or criticize trends. That's just the way the trends work. And so over the last couple of weeks, we've been diving into a couple of ideas. The first week we asked the question, well, what is heaven going to be like? And we explore this idea that there are some things that we can do today that are going to have an impact in the future. That many people have this idea that heaven is this faraway place, that it's far off in the distance, and there's nothing that we can do that's going to impact heaven. But we discovered together in week one that that could not be further from the truth. And I challenged you to do this, to make a decision this week that would show up in eternity. That you can make a decision this week that is going to show up in eternity. That there are some decisions, relational, financial, some decisions that you can make in this present moment that will, when we understand what God says about eternity and what God says about heaven, that are going to show up in eternity one day. And we can make a whole bunch of things done today, even though we feel like sometimes heaven has no relevance on today. When we understand what God says that heaven is going to be like, we realize that every single day matters. And then last week we had a look at this idea of return on investment. And I kind of gave you guys an idea of what would I think specifically is probably one of the top two things that we could do that would show up in eternity at some point, and that would be the greatest investment that every single one of us could make in our lives. If you remember, I cut up a milk tart on stage and just kind of debunk a myth that we all have bought into, that if I made more money, I would be able to give more money. In fact, did anybody get milk tart last week? Yeah, it was delicious, right? It was amazing. Some of you are thinking I should have been in church last week because I would have got some milk tart in the service, but that's not happening today. I'm sorry. There's nothing like that today. But one of the things we discovered together is we eavesdropped into this conversation between God and the nation of Israel, and but a pretty tense conversation. We discovered there was a command and there was an invitation in that as well. And that as we kind of cut up the milk tart on stage, we discovered together that God is not satisfied with our leftovers. He's calling us to stop robbing him of tithes and offerings, that we're to bring him a tenth of every bit of income we earn, called a tithe, and we're supposed to bring that. We're supposed to invest that into the kingdom of heaven. And what we discovered together is that tithing has little to do, and tithing is not only a tenth, but tithing is the first tenth of every little bit of income we earn, and that an offering is over and above a tithe, that over and above those moments. And one of the amazing things is that we discover together that, as much as it comes across as God just wants our money or the church just wants our money, we in fact discover that this has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with faith. It has everything to do with our hearts. I gave you a challenge as well, and we said this last week, that when you become a caretaker of God's kingdom, God becomes a caretaker of your kingdom. Then in fact you have a kingdom in this world, and it's called your net worth. And the point is not to kind of compare yours to someone else's, if you have more or less than someone else's. No, the idea is, no, we're meant to invest in the kingdom of God. Because when we become a caretaker of God's kingdom, he becomes a caretaker of our kingdom. And tithing has very little to do with money, and it has a lot to do with faith. That we're supposed to bring a tenth into the storehouse. And then God says this amazing thing. He says, test me in this and see that I am faithful. So that was kind of last week. And if you want to know, watching those messages, you want to see that. Maybe you want to get some discussion questions. You can discuss those messages in your group. You can go to our website and you can go and do that. And maybe you want to take those messages and start a group at work and watch one of those messages over lunch. and get the discussion questions and discuss it at that time as well. Now today we're kind of going to wrap the series up. We're going to jump into what I think is probably one of the most timeless relational principles that we can do while on this earth. And one of the amazing things is that we all have relationships. Each and every one of us have a relationship, right? There's the relationships that we have, all kinds of variety of them. In business, we have them at home, in family, we have all kinds of relationships. And what's amazing is we bring something to a relationship. Now, I have a relationship in my life which is quite significant. I'm married to Kelly. We've been married for 10 years on Friday. Can you imagine that? It's pretty amazing. And so this is my gift to her for our anniversary, actually, which I should have given to her on Friday, but I didn't because I wanted to use it on stage. And so she'll get this after the service. But one of the things that is amazing is we bring something to our relationships. We bring something, and what we bring is we bring how we were parented. We bring how we grew up. We bring our education. We bring how others treated us, whether we were bullied at school, how those moments where we bring hurt relationships with us into our relationships. We bring the good, we bring the bad, and we bring the ugly from everything that's happened in the past into a relationship. And there's a very interesting dynamic that happens in a relationship is that I'm bringing a whole bunch of stuff to a relationship that I have with you, and you have little or no idea what I'm bringing. Right? So I've got all the stuff that I'm bringing to a relationship that I have to bring to the table, and you have little or no idea what I have to bring to that relationship. And we all slip into this little thing where those things that we bring become expectations on other people. We bring a whole bunch of things to that relationship, and then suddenly we're placing expectations on other people. And what's amazing is that they have no idea that we are placing those expectations on them. We have expectations of others. Now, without them knowing, we walk in and we say, well, I'm expecting this from you. I'm expecting that from you. And you've probably experienced this. And when we don't get what we expected from those people, what happens? We burst out in anger. We get frustrated. We become disappointed in those moments. An amazing thing is they have no idea that was ever expected of them. That we had all these expectations and they never expected had those expectations on them. Maybe you've experienced this in a marriage. Maybe you've experienced this in a friendship. Maybe you've experienced this at work, where you had all these expectations. You brought all these expectations to that work, and suddenly you're disappointed in that, and really you begin to blame other people when they had no idea that those expectations have been brought to the relationship. You know, maybe you've gone to your first job. You started a job at the beginning of the year, and you had all these expectations of what your first job was going to be like. Man, people have been telling you how great work is and how great your first job was going to be, right? But you spent your first couple of weeks just fetching coffee, doing the boss's laundry, you're taking minutes in meetings. It's nothing what you thought your first job was ever going to be like. And suddenly, all your expectations are not met, and you're feeling disappointed in that. And you blame your boss, you blame your manager, you find someone to blame, or you just quit and you walk away. Maybe some of you have experienced this in a marriage. You know, your first day back from honeymoon, you're not getting breakfast in bed. You know, your lunch is not ready on the table as you're walking out to work. That's not all there. Maybe you've been married for a couple of years and he still can't find the laundry basket. She still cannot cook. On a serious topic, maybe you still haven't bought your first house. You brought all these expectations with you to this relationship, to this marriage, and suddenly they're not met and you're feeling disappointed. You're feeling frustrated, and you blame your spouse, sometimes even to the point where you walk out. And yet that person had no idea that those expectations were placed on them. We bring something to a relationship. Now, there's the other way around. It works the other way around as well, that we have expectations of others, but we have expectations of ourselves as well. That because of the things we bring to a relationship, sometimes we believe that we need to act a certain way or we need to behave a certain way, that there are expectations placed on ourselves or we put on ourselves because of the way we treat a relationship. Maybe we elevate a relationship in our lives and we believe we need to be a certain way so that we can keep that relationship in check. And what happens again is, we don't live up to our own expectations and we feel like we've failed, we feel like we've disappointed everyone around us, and we say sorry and we say all these things to other people and they're like, no, what are you sorry about? I didn't even place those expectations on you. We have expectations of ourselves in those moments as well. Maybe you've experienced this, you're 30, maybe you're 40 and you're kind of disappointed in your life because you thought by now you'd be married. Maybe your first marriage is just gone. Maybe you're kind of hoping that you would have kids at this point, and you're disappointed in yourself in these moments. You see, we all have relationships, and we all bring something to a relationship, but we all have expectations that we place on others or we place on ourselves. We have expectations of others and we have expectations of ourselves. Now, with that in mind, one of the amazing things about neuroscience and about research is that they've done a whole bunch of studies and discovered that, in fact, if you're in the presence of someone who you've kind of elevated that relationship of, you know, maybe they're famous, maybe they're a little more wealthy than you, maybe they're a little bit further along in business than you, do you know that there's something actually in the brain that shuts off, that makes you pretty much dumb? Did you know that? Like you maybe see people, I'm sure you've seen this somewhere, like there's this person, a personality, maybe there's someone at work, and when you're in the presence of that person, or there's a group of people in the presence of that person, they kind of act, and we might say that looks like they're acting silly. But it's actually a chemical thing that happens in the brain, and they shut down. There's something in the brain that actually shuts off, and they respond in that way. Now, I don't know all of you, okay, but what I do know about you is that within your circle of influence, within your friends, within your family, within the people that are around you at work, within the people that are around you in your neighborhood, that's true of you as well. That you have, in some instances, you have placed someone on a pedestal, or you have placed yourself on a pedestal, and that there are some expectations of you, or you have placed expectations on other people in those moments. And that when you're around them, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you're from, or regardless of how much or how little you might think of yourself, you have the potential in those moments, in your circle of influence, to create a whole bunch of harm by what you say and the way that you act. You have the potential, regardless of who you are, to create a lot of harm. But the opposite is true as well, and that's where we're going today, is that we have the opportunity to do a whole bunch of good. You see, you can unknowingly hold a certain amount of power over someone in your life. And it's true that someone can hold that power over you as well. You've maybe seen it in a cult. Some of these cults just like pop up out of nowhere. And unfortunately, it's usually a male character, and he seems to have this hold on a whole group of people, right? He's walking around and he's making certain promises. Unfortunately, most times they have some verses that they're throwing in as well to the mix. And in those moments, these people seem to be following him, and they haven't achieved anything as a group of people, but he seems to have this hold on them. There's this power there. Now, that's an extreme, but each and every one of us have power over a certain group of people. We have influence over people in our lives, and we have given that power and we have given that influence to people as well. And so what I want to talk about today is an idea called mutual submission. That I'm here for your benefit, and that you are here for my benefit. That I'm here, just to make sure that whatever you're doing in your life is the best that you can do, and that I hope that you're reciprocating and doing the same for me. It's an idea that Paul teaches and Jesus models throughout their stories. But I would go as far as say this, that everything can be solved with wanting the best for each other. That everything can be solved with wanting the best for each other. And what I mean with that is that when two people come at a situation, they come at a problem, and they both want the best for each other, that I'm bringing what I have to the table, and you're bringing what you have to the table, and I'm doing that for your benefit, not mine, that everything can be solved with wanting the best for each other. And that's true of individuals, but it's also true of teams, of families, of groups of people together, that everything can be solved. Now, if you're here today and you're not a follower of Jesus, you're still on the fence about this whole Jesus thing and what's going on there, today might just be interesting for you. Today is not something that you have to go and apply. I would say that your relationships would be better for applying this idea of mutual submission to your life. Your relationships would certainly be better if you did this, but it's up to you. It's your choice. You can do this if you want to. But for the rest of us, as followers of Jesus, this is an imperative. This is something we have to do. This is a non-negotiable. And we get this idea from the Apostle Paul, and it comes from probably one of the most controversial statements that he has made in the New Testament. And we all kind of know what that statement is because it's spoken about out of context all the time, and it's just become a huge part of debate. But it's that whole idea of wives submit to your husbands. But an interesting side note, do you know that in the original Greek manuscripts that word submit, that verb submit is not even in there? It actually says, wives unto your husbands as unto the Lord, that there's no verb there. I bet you didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know that until like a week and a half ago. I mean, it's incredible. But what happened is, as they were copying these manuscripts and as they were continuing to write these manuscripts out to people, that verb ended up showing up in that sentence because it was obvious that there was no verb. And the verb comes from the first verse in that paragraph, in that chapter that we're going to look at today. But that verb, submit, was never there originally. And so as they have done this, that submit verb kind of sets the tone, it sets the character, it kind of sets the phrasing for that whole paragraph that is in there. And that sentence is this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And what's amazing to me about Paul is when Paul comes along, Paul doesn't say, hey, you know how it was done? That there was this thing between the nation of Israel and God, and that was an old thing, and I'm going to, that's an old, and we're going to create a completely new thing. No, he doesn't say that. He comes along, and all he does is he applies what Jesus teaches, to love God and love others. And this is one of those. It's an application of love others, love our neighbors, love those people around us. That you and I are to submit to one another, not out of reverence for each other, because I don't deserve that and you don't deserve that, but we're to submit to each other out of reverence for Christ, who submitted himself on our behalf. That we're to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And I honestly think that if we could just get this idea of mutual submission right, that your marriage would be better, your friendships would be better, your relationships at work would be better. Every single relationship you have would be better. And what's amazing about this is Paul goes on and he kind of gives the application of each of those things. He says, wives, husbands, children, in marriage. He unpacks this idea a little bit more. But the writer Mark, who spent time with Jesus, he writes an account of Jesus' life and gives us some information about what Jesus says about this topic. And Jesus modeled this, but he taught us something, and he kind of takes us to a completely new level, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time together on today. Now, Jesus knew that when he left, when he went to Jerusalem, when he died, rose again, and then kind of left this group of men in charge, that they were kind of going to be the men. They were going to be the guys who had influence. They were going to be the guys who were in charge of this whole thing, and they had a lot of potential to wreck it all. They're humans. They're imperfect. They had the potential to wreck this whole thing as well. And so Jesus wanted to make sure that they got this idea, and he extends that to you and to me today as well. And so they were on their way up to Jerusalem. Mark's writing this account. They were up on their way to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. I just want to explain that just quickly. What had happened is Jesus, if you go and read the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has just turned something that they all knew completely on their head. They had grown up believing as a people that if something was going well in your life, that God was blessing you. And then if something was going bad in your life or you had an illness, that God had in fact placed a curse on you. They believed that their whole life. And Jesus comes along and says, nope, that's not how it works. He turned the whole thing upside down. And so they're astonished. Some of those who were following were still afraid in those moments. But again, Jesus, took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. So he sits them all down, says, this is what's going to happen. We're going to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man, referring to himself, but also, again, something that they'd grown up believing their entire life. They'd been hearing about the Son of Man who was going to come, this Joshua-type warrior who was going to come and save them from the Romans. And they were hoping that Jesus was going to be that. And the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law, that they will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him, and kill him. And 3 days later, he will rise. Now, we read that, and it's kind of like just a description of what's going to happen. I kind of think that maybe Mark wrote the shortened version just, for simplification purposes. But when he was talking about these things, remember, they lived in a time where they smelt a flogging. They had seen a flogging. They had maybe experienced a flogging. It was a real thing to them. And we glance over this very, very quickly. But I want you to see what the text says. The text says this, then, as in like the very next thing, okay? So he's just told them all about what's going to happen to him. Then James and John, sons of Zebedee, come to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Now, I don't know about you, but I think Jesus is a lot more gracious than I am, because if I just told you that I was going to be flogged and spat on and mocked and all of these things, and you came to me and said, will you do whatever it is that I want you to do for me? I probably wouldn't respond the way Jesus did. But he responds this way. He says, what do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory. Now, basically, they had all these expectations, right? They believed that Jesus was going to be the Messiah, that he was going to come, he was going to rip open his robe, there was going to be a huge M on his chest, and he was like, the Messiah is here, we're taking over Rome, we're doing everything we can to try and squash the Romans. Or they at least believed that at some point, the angels were going to come down, there was going to be a war, and the Romans were going to be ostracized, and the Jews were going to be king. That Jesus was going to be placed on the throne, that he was going to be the king in those moments. And they knew that there were going to need to be some delegation and things, so they wanted to be second and third in line. They had all these expectations in that, and Jesus is sitting there going, hey, I'm going to be flogged, and I'm going to be beaten, and I'm going to be spat on, and then I'm going to be put to death. And they're kind of going, hey, at that point in time, we're going to just step back and let that all happen because, at the end of the day, it's still going to be good. It's still going to be you, it's still going to be sitting on the throne. And when everything's back to normal, we're going to come out of hiding, and we're going to, be there. And at that point, can I be number 2 and number 3? They had all these expectations in those moments. But when the other 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. And not indignant like, hey, he's just told you how he's going to die. I mean, why are you talking like this? Like, no. Indignant like, excuse me, who are you two to want to be number 2 and number 3? What about the rest of us? Why can't the rest of us be number 2 or number 3? Why do you get preference over the rest of us? And then Jesus called them together and said, and I just have to stop here for a moment because every time I read this verse, every time I read this passage or I hear someone teach about this, I'm reminded that I'm getting called with that group. And I'm sitting on the side of the road, and Jesus is telling me what he's about to tell those disciples as well. And I think that he is telling you what he's about to tell those disciples as well. Because we live in a world where we believe at some point that we deserve something, that we deserve certain things. And I would say to you today that entitlement begins somewhere. It's an emotion that I run into all the time. I think it's an emotion that you run into all the time, however subtle it might be. We bump into this emotion all the time. I got here first, I'm in a rush, I've been here longer. I pay school fees to the school, you're the teacher of my child, therefore you should do what I say. I was born in a certain area. I was born from a certain family. I went to this school. I went to this university. I hold this degree. I have this color skin. My parents are so-and-so. I know so-and-so. There is a point that comes in our lives where we begin to believe that we deserve something, that we expect something based on who we know, one of those things, who we know, who we are, where we were raised. There comes a time when we begin to justify that we can treat people a certain way because of who we are or where we've come from. That we can talk to people a certain way. That we can treat people a certain way. And now, don't mishear me, because there are some basic things that every single person deserves, okay? But when we sit there and we think that we expect, and that's our word, expect something because of who we are or what we've done in our life, that's entitlement. If we sit back, and unfortunately the millennials get talked about this all the time, they sit back and they are waiting for things to be handed to us on a silver platter, regardless of the work we've done, that we just expect those things because we've had some good intentions, some good vibes out there in the universe, that's entitlement. You see, each and every one of us have a daily battle with this idea that we deserve something or that we deserve to be treated a certain way because of X, Y, and Z. And I'm reminded, and you're reminded as well, that as followers of Jesus, entitlement is not what we're called to be or to experience. But entitlement begins somewhere. It begins with something. And when we begin to expect some things, we begin to act on that entitlement, we're sitting on the side of the road just like James and John are, just like these 12. We're sitting there and we're about to hear what Jesus is going to say, not only to them, but to us as well. Jesus calls them together and he said this, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And lord it over is a very interesting phrase. It probably only appears one other place in the scriptures. But it basically means, once they get in charge of people, once this group of people get in charge of people, they use that authority to benefit themselves and not other people, often to the demise of other people. So Jesus says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. He's basically explaining how the authority structures work in this time. He's saying, hey, you know how it works in the world? You know how everyone kind of gets into a position of power and then they use that authority over other people? They use those things. They expect some things because of the position they're on. Or they're using their authority for their benefit and not for the benefit of other people. And honestly, we don't have to look very far in our society or in our country to see that this is still true today. That this wasn't just something that they experienced 2,000, 3,000 years ago with the authority structures. It's still something that we experience today. In fact, you just have to sit in traffic for a couple of minutes and see that person who drives down the yellow line who thinks that they are entitled to be at the front of the line or that they can go a little faster because they've been waiting apparently longer than you have in traffic. Or maybe the person who decides that they've been sitting in a red traffic light for just too long and that their time is more valuable than yours and they decide to go past you or they go through that red traffic light. Or that they're not going to stop at a stop street, that they're going to treat it more as a yield and they're just going to go straight through that. We don't have to look far to see that this is still the case. And Jesus says, hey, you know how it works everywhere else? You know how it works in which they're saying, yes, that's exactly why we want to be number 2 and number 3, because we want to be there. This is how it's going to work. And then Jesus says 4 words that deflates everything. He says, not so with you. You guys know how it works in, the authority structures around this area. You understand that, yes, that's exactly why we want to be number 2 and number 3. Well, that's not how it works in my kingdom. That's not how it works with my people. That's not how it's going to work in my gatherings. Not so with you. And when we experience that entitlement that creeps up inside of us, when we begin to believe that we deserve something or that we can justify how we treat people based on who we are or where we're from or the color of our skin, whatever that looks like, we're to hear those 4 words as well, whispered from Jesus, not so with you. That is not how it works in my kingdom. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you're called to something higher. Jesus carries on and says, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you, at which point I think he could have stopped and gone, right, let's do a poll quickly. Who wants to be great? Anybody want to be great? I know your heart. Who wants to be great? And I think everyone would have raised their hand because why? Who wants to be not great, right? But whoever wants to be great among you must be the slave, must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. At which point I think some of the men would be like, could you have told us that at the beginning of this whole thing when I signed up to be your follower? I didn't expect I was going to have to serve people. That's not the expectation I had. The expectation I had was that, you're going to come along, you're the Messiah, you're going to be the number 1, you're going to need some people underneath you. When we start taking over this place, there's going to be some delegation needed. And, I would like to be number 2, and he'd like to be number 3, and then maybe you're going to have a layer of 4 or 5 people underneath you. Jesus says that's how it may work in all the authority structures. But not so with you. That's not how it works in my kingdom. It's not how it's going to work in my kingdom going forward. He says that if you want to be great, then you should be a servant. And he punctuates this whole thing by saying this line. He says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. See, if you want to be great, then you should be the servant of all. Jesus, again, referring to himself as the Son of Man, this person this Messiah that the Jewish people had been longing for, that they had been waiting years and years for, that they lived under the impression of so many different groups of people, and they were waiting for him to come save. There were all these expectations out there. And Jesus says that might be how it works everywhere else, but it's not going to work here. Not so with you, that if you want to be great, you need to come out and serve. You see, this idea is foreign in our culture. In fact, some of you have experienced this. You've experienced the drift that we all experience, that we move away from this idea of mutual submission, that it's about my little kingdom, that it's about what I'm doing, it's about what's best for me, that I deserve some things, that I deserve to be treated a certain way, and that I'm expected to have a certain group of things because of who I am, what I studied, how much you're paying me, whatever that might look like. But Jesus calls us back to mutual submission. He calls us back to this idea that we're supposed to be here, that I'm here for your benefit. And that the more responsibility I receive, the more responsible I am. That the more resources I have, the more responsibility I have to make sure that you're resourced to do what you have to do. The more authority I have, that I'm supposed to leverage that authority to make sure that you have everything that you need to do, what you need to have to do. This idea of mutual submission that we're called to is a non-negotiable for us as followers of Jesus. If you're not a follower of Jesus, this is an optional thing. You can try this. Your relationships will be better. I can promise you that. But this idea of mutual submission is foreign to each and every one of us. And at the heart of that is this question: what can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? And it's a foreign question, right? It's not something we're going to naturally ask. In fact, the older you get, or the higher up on a corporate ladder you do climb, the less you ask this question and the more it is asked of you. Hey, what can I do to help? What can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? But we can go months, even years, without even asking this question. Now, I have a confession to make. Men, you probably fall in the same category as this. This is not a question we ask around the house either, right? Especially if we're married. You know, we don't walk around asking our wife every couple of minutes, hey, what can I do to help you? Because we're dreading the fact that she might send us to the shops, right? And she replies nothing, and you're bolted. You're out the door. You are gone in case she changes her mind. And this is someone that we love more than anything, anybody on the planet. And we're not even willing to ask them that question of what can I do to help you? But there's a tension in this, right? And I'm sure that you've maybe experienced this tension somewhere along the line. I remember experiencing it as a kid. I went to a birthday party, and they were handing out ice creams, and I got an ice cream, and it was a delicious ice cream. It was amazing. And I finished my ice cream pretty quickly, and I went back to my friend's mom, and I was like, hey, could I have another one? And she was like, well, if I do it for you, I have to do it for everyone. To which I thought and never said, no, you don't. Just give me another ice cream. Like, no one else is going to know in this moment. But there's a tension in this idea that we kind of feel like if I cannot do it for everyone, I'm not going to do it for anyone. And at the heart of this idea of what can I do to help you, at the heart of this idea of mutual submission, and maybe you've heard us say this before, is this idea that you need to do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. That I'm going to do everything I can to help one person, even though I cannot do it for everyone, but because I cannot do it for everyone, I'm certainly not going to do nothing. And there comes a point in time in our lives where this entitlement thing rises up inside of us. Because there's some ones we don't want to be our one, right? There's someone in our life that we don't want to try and help. We don't want to ask this question to. And we need to remember what Jesus said, not so with you. You see, Jesus never pretended to be fair. Never did he pretend to be fair. You follow Jesus through the Gospels with this idea, and you see that Jesus was never fair. He'd walk around with thousands of people around him. Thousands. They all wanted to be fed. They wanted to be healed. They wanted to just experience the Savior, this Messiah that was walking around. And with the thousands of people around him, what did Jesus do? He'd stop and he'd spend a moment with just one person. Jesus never pretended to be fair. In fact, if you're here this morning and you're a parent, next time one of your children asks you or say to you, that's not fair, you just say to them, fairness ended in the Garden of Eden. It ended with Adam and Eve. You just tell them that. Jesus never pretended to be fair in those moments. Jesus did what we were called to do, is to be engaged with someone, to be there in the present moment with that person, to do for one what we wish we could do for everyone. But now let's go back to the disciples. Because what's amazing about the disciples is I actually think they got this. I actually think they got this partly because of that conversation on the side of the road, but I think partly because of what they'd seen Jesus do, and partly because of something that happens to them in their last moments together, what we refer to today as the Last Supper. You see, they're sitting down for a meal, and Jesus stands up and he takes off his rabbinical robe, and he puts a towel around his waist, and he picks up a bowl of water. And I'm sure every single person in that room was like, oh my gosh, we all forgot to wash people's feet. Who's going to offer to wash people's feet? I think it was your turn, James. Why don't you wash everyone's feet? And Peter's having none of this. Jesus, sit down. I'm going to wash people's feet. And Jesus turns around and says, no, Peter, I'm doing this. You sit down. And I don't know if you have ever experienced someone washing your feet or if you have been to a foot washing, but it takes a long time. And it's pretty awkward. And I can pretty much guarantee that in this moment, there is absolute silence in this room. And as Jesus is going around and he's washing these 24 feet, all the disciples' feet, there's absolute silence. And all you can hear is maybe some noise that's happening in the street outside and the dripping of the water that is falling back into the bowl of water. It was probably the most awkward moment they had ever shared in their life in those 3.5 years together. But Jesus finishes, he stands up, he puts his robe back on, and he sits down and he says this, "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. But now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I've set for you an example that you should do as I have done for you." There's that application thing again. He's saying, hey, how far are you to go when it comes to loving one another? Well, the least you should do is wash another person's feet. And the disciples are like, well, that's what the servants do. That's what we have servants for. And Jesus is like, no, I've taken away every excuse. Because then he says this, "For very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him." He says that, hey, remember that thing on the side of the road? And the disciples are like, oh, so you serious about that whole conversation we had on the side of the road about, us being the servant of all? He's like, yes, it is. And I've just given you an example of what you are to do, that I might be your master. I might be your Lord and teacher, yes, but you are to go and wash one another's feet. That when that feeling rises up inside of you that I'm worthy of something else, or I'm deserving of something else, that I'm expecting something else, we are to remember to go and wash other people's feet. Jesus says, I have taken away every single one of your excuses for someone who you feel is undeserving of you to wash their feet. Because the master is not greater. We're there to be the servant of all. And then he closes with this. He says, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And what's amazing to me is I kind of think that these guys got this. Because as we read the account of the early church that we have recorded for us in the book of Acts in the Bible, we read about these guys, and there's James, there's Peter, there's John, and they're out there and they're serving the widows their food. They're waiting tables. And all these men, all they're trying to do is trying to pry their hands away from this and say, go and teach, go and do what you want to do. And, Peter, just stop serving the widows. And he's like, no. I don't want anyone to ever think that I'm above waiting tables. I'm going to continue to do this. You never hear about Matthew or James or Peter as they're walking around that they have this huge ego issue. I think they got this because I think that when they saw Jesus die and when they peered into an empty tomb, everything that happened to them, they heard those 4 words whispered in their ear, not so with you. Not so with you. Not so with you. And so when entitlement begins to creep up in our lives, in your life and in my life, when entitlement begins to creep up, we just need to go find a whole bunch more feet to wash. Because the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Now, if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus again, you can just do this, and your relationship will be better. But I think as I close here today, I really think that many of us understand this principle. Many of us know, now that we know these things, we know what we're supposed to do in this moment. But we can so easily talk ourselves out of doing, right? We know these things, but we so easily talk ourselves out of this. And look what Jesus says again. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. It's not about knowledge. It's about doing it. It's about actually doing mutual submission. Bringing what you have to the table for the benefit of the other person, regardless of what you get back. Asking those questions of what can I do to help you in those moments? And I think there are a whole bunch of you that are sitting here today who get this, and you're doing something about this. It's why you serve on a team, why you connect in a group, why you give generously, why you invite friends to experience Southpoint. Yes, there's knowledge involved in all of this, but it's when you do these things that you experience something far greater than just knowing about them. In fact, in those moments when you serve on a team, you know that you're not here just to kind of show people around. You're trying to help them on their faith journey that they might experience Jesus Christ. Give them some hope in those moments. When you connect in a group, you're not there just to, have a fun chat, have some coffee and just discuss what we learned on Sunday. You're there to provide for another person accountability, belonging, and care. And when you bring that to a group, those people bring that back to you as well. That when you give generously, you realize you're not just investing in what God is doing in the city, you're providing a safe place that people can come in, they can explore, they can find hope, that they can find a Savior who loves them more than they will ever know. And that when you invite a friend, you're not just inviting them to church. When you hear one of those knots that they're not in church, that it's not going well, that it's not prepared for, when you hear those three things and you invite them to church, you're not just inviting them to church. You're inviting them into a space where they can learn about their Savior, Jesus, who calls each and every person a son and a daughter and is able to open his arms and say, welcome home. Welcome back to my family. So when you and I are tempted to go out there and we believe that we're expecting something, that we deserve to be treated a certain way, that we believe that we can treat other people a certain way, we need to remember, not so with you. Because we're called to ask that question, what can I do to help you? Because every relationship will be better when we bring what we have to the table, expecting nothing in return. That we have come to serve those people. Because in a trendy world, the best things in this life are timeless. And there are some decisions that you can make today that will show up in eternity sometime. And heaven is certainly timeless. That you can bring your tithe into the storehouse and realize that God says that test me in this and see that I am not faithful. And again, tithing has little to do with money and a lot to do with faith. And then we can ask the question of the people around us, what can I do to help you? Because everything can be solved in this world when we want the best for one another. When we do what we were called to be as followers of Jesus, to love each other. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for our time together today. Thank you for the series that we've been able to experience some timeless things. Father, I really do believe that this one relational truth is timeless. Father, your disciples got this right. You modeled this so beautifully for us. And Father, I pray for the person here who's maybe wrestling with that expectation. Maybe they've just gone through something. Maybe it be a marriage, maybe it be a work relationship, maybe it be some relational tension they're experiencing in their life. Father God, that you would say to them, oh, I came to serve you in this moment, that you sent your son to serve us, and that we might turn around and we might ask the question, well, what can I do to help you in those moments? That Father, we would put aside our egos, that we would put aside whatever we think that we deserve. Father, regardless of who we are, what color we are, what area we live in, what class we are, Father, regardless of who we are, at the end of the day, we are a son and daughter of you. And Father, may we live out that calling for each and every one of us to love one another. Father, thank you for your son. And we ask that you would give us courage to do what it is you're calling us to do, and wisdom to be able to figure out where we might need to apply this in our lives. Because Father, knowledge is one thing, but application makes all the difference. Father, it's in your precious son's name we pray these things.